Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to deep into a website you might not have heard of, the Heart of Texas Veterans Memorial.
Yeah, it's a really interesting project, focused on a specific region, 8 counties in Texas. But they're doing some really unique things in terms of how they honor veterans.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're going to focus on today. Like how they define veteran is really different. And then there's this whole thing about how a sailor who never left San Diego could end up being listed as a Vietnam vet.
Right, right. And that gets into some really interesting questions about, like, what does it even mean to serve during wartime? Especially if you weren't, quote unquote, in country.
Exactly. And so to get us started, can you give us a little background on the site? What's their overall mission?
Sure. So basically, they're trying to create a comprehensive list of every single veteran from those 8 counties. And it's not just names and dates, they're trying to tell their stories, too.
And I think they do a great job of conveying like the weight of that service. Like there's this quote on the site that really stuck with me. It says, "A veteran wrote a blank check made payable to the government of the United States of America for an amount of up to and including their life."
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful.
It is, right? It really makes you think about what it means to serve.
Absolutely. And I think that quote really gets at the heart of what this memorial is trying to do to honor that sacrifice.
Okay, so let's talk about that definition of veteran because it seems like they're pretty inclusive.
Yeah, they are. Like, it doesn't matter if you were active duty or retired or just did one enlistment or were in the reserves. If you served, you're included.
And then there's that whole thing about how location doesn't necessarily matter.
Right. So like I was saying earlier, a sailor serving in San Diego during Vietnam would still be listed as a Vietnam veteran on this site.
So they're not just focused on boots on the ground. It's more about the time period you served in.
Exactly. They're acknowledging that everyone who served during a particular conflict played a role, even if they weren't directly in the combat zone.
It's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, it definitely challenges how we traditionally think about wartime service.
Now, the website covers a pretty wide range of conflicts, right?
It does, yeah. You've got the Civil War, World Wars I and II, Korea, Vietnam, and even post 9/11 conflicts.
And it's not just lists of names. They've got all sorts of content, including these deep dive stories.
Oh, yeah, those are fascinating.
So what are those exactly?
So they're using this AI tool from Google called Notebook LM, and it basically analyzes all the data they have about a veteran and then creates like a little audio story about them.
Whoa, so it's like AI storytelling.
Yeah, pretty cool, right?
That's wild. Have you seen anything like that before?
Not really, and it makes you think about, the role of AI and how we remember history.
Yeah, it's definitely cutting edge stuff. All right, so we've talked about their mission and how they define a veteran, but where does all this information come from? Like, how do they build these profiles?
Well, a lot of it comes from community contributions, so like newspapers, records, obituaries, things like that.
So it's a real grassroots effort.
Absolutely. And they're always looking for more information. They even have a section on the website where people can submit corrections if they find any mistakes.
So they're committed to getting it right.
Oh, yeah. Accuracy is super important to them. And it makes sense, right? You're dealing with people's lives and legacies here.
Now, all of this has to be pretty expensive to maintain, right? Like, how do they fund all of this?
Yeah, good question. So they're actually a not-for-profit organization, which means they rely on donations and grants to keep everything running.
Which is pretty amazing when you think about the scope of what they're doing.
It is, yeah. It really speaks to how much people value this project and the stories they're trying to preserve.
It really does. And, one little detail that I noticed on the site, like just visually, was the use of poppies.
Oh, yeah, the poppies.
It seems like a small thing, but it's so symbolic, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the poppy is so tied to remembrance, especially for World War I, and you see it pop up in memorials all over the world.
Yeah, and it really connects these Texas veterans to a global narrative of service and sacrifice.
Exactly. And it kind of makes you wonder, like, why do we memorialize veterans in the first place? Like, what's the point of all this?
That's a great question. And I think it's about so much more than just remembering names and dates. It's about understanding the impact of their service and making sure those stories continue to inspire future generations.
Right. And it's about honoring their sacrifice and what their service means for us today.
One thing that really impressed me about this site is just how easy it is to use. Like, you don't need to be some tech whiz to find your way around.
Yeah, it is really well designed, and I think that's important, because they want this information to be accessible to everyone, whether you're a family member looking for information about a loved one or just someone who's interested in history.
Exactly. And speaking of getting involved, they actually have a whole section about how people can contribute to the project.
Oh, yeah, that's one of the things I really like about this site. They're very upfront about the fact that they don't have all the answers, and they encourage people to submit information, photos, even directions if they see something that's wrong.
So it's like a collaborative effort.
Exactly. And, they even encourage people to share their own personal stories and anecdotes about the veterans listed on the site, which I think adds a really nice personal touch.
Yeah, it's like they're building this living archive, It's not just static data.
Totally. And like we were talking about earlier, the site covers a lot of different conflicts, so you can find veterans from the Civil War, World Wars I and II, Korea, Vietnam, even post 9/11 conflicts.
It's amazing how many generations are represented on the site, and it really speaks to this long history of service in these Texas counties.
It does, and they've done a really good job of organizing everything. Like you can search by conflict, by name, you can even browse by county.
Yeah, it's super user-friendly, and I think that's a testament to how much care they've put into this project.
And it's not just a one-time thing either. They're constantly updating the site, adding new information, refining existing entries. It's a real labor of love.
It really is, and I think it speaks to this bigger mission they have. It's not just about listing names and dates, it's about making sure these stories are told and these veterans are remembered.
Exactly. It's about honoring their legacy and connecting us to the past.
Okay, so before we move on, I wanted to circle back to those deep dive stories we mentioned earlier, the ones that are generated by the AI, the Notebook LM thing.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It's just such a fascinating use of technology, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
I mean, it's definitely innovative, right? Like using AI to create these audio narratives is a really cool way to engage people with history. It's a lot more immersive than just reading text on a screen.
Totally. It's like you're listening to someone tell you a story. It feels more personal.
Yeah, it's a really effective way of bringing the past to life. But it does raise some interesting questions, about how we interpret history, especially when AI is involved.
Like, for example, how much of the narrative is just based on the facts they have, and how much is the AI kind of adding its own interpretation?
That's a great question, and it's something that a lot of people are talking about in the field of digital history and archives.
Yeah, it's almost like having a digital storyteller, and it makes you wonder, like, is this the future of memorialization? Are we going to see more sites using AI in this way?
I think it's definitely a possibility, and it's a conversation that's just getting started.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. And it reminds us that even though we're talking about history, the way we engage with the past is constantly changing.
Totally, and this website is a great example of that.
All right, so before we get too carried away with the future, I think we need to take a closer look at some of these individual stories and really see how this AI is being used in practice.
Sounds good to me. Let's dive in.
As we wrap up our look at the heart of Texas Veterans Memorial, I keep thinking about how much thought they put into the design of the site.
Oh, for sure. It's not just about the information, right? It's how they present it.
Right. Like it's easy to navigate, but they also use all these amazing historical photos and documents.
Oh, yeah. That's what really gets you, Like reading a name and a list of dates is one thing, but then you see a photo of that person in uniform, maybe with their buddies or their family, and it just hits you differently.
Totally. It suddenly becomes so much more real. It's like, oh, wow, these were actual people with lives and families and dreams.
Exactly. And they were right here in these counties, living their lives.
And it's not just the photos either. They also use things like the poppy, which we talked about earlier, to add those layers of symbolism and meaning.
Right? The poppy is such a powerful image, and it connects these stories to this broader history of service and remembrance.
And I think the site does a really good job of connecting those individual stories to the bigger picture. Like you can explore the specific experiences of veterans for these 8 counties, but you also see how their service fits into the larger narrative of American history.
It's like they're zooming in and out, right? You see the details, but you never lose sight of the whole.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this site so compelling. You can spend hours exploring, and you'll still feel like you've only scratched the surface.
Totally. And I think that speaks to the power of storytelling. Like these stories are meant to be shared and passed down.
And they've made them accessible to anyone, regardless of their background or whether they know a lot about history or not.
Right. It's a resource for everyone.
Well, I think it's safe to say that our deep dive into the heart of Texas Veterans Memorial has been a really eye-opening experience.
Yeah, it has. We've learned about how they define a veteran, how they're using AI to tell these stories, and just their overall commitment to getting it right.
But most importantly, I think we've been reminded of the incredible sacrifices made by these veterans and the importance of honoring their legacy.
Absolutely. These stories aren't just about the past. They're about who we are today and what we value as a nation.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this question. How can we ensure that future generations understand and appreciate these sacrifices?
It's a question worth thinking about.
It really is. I encourage everyone to check out the Heart of Texas Veterans Memorial website for themselves. You might even be inspired to contribute to their efforts to preserve these stories.
That's a great idea.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly, keep the stories alive.